Hi, thanks very much. My name is Wayne Schulz. I've been working with Sage 100 since, I think it goes all the way back to 1996. So for those of you who've been with Sage 100 for a while, that goes back to the old blue screen days of Sage 100 before we had Windows and all that fancy stuff. So I've seen quite a lot of changes from, when it was purely desktop based down to the point where we are now, where people will run it on just about anywhere, where they'll run it locally, run it in the cloud, run it remotely. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about is, and we get this question an awful lot, is how people can connect in and run Sage 100 and put it in the cloud, so to speak. For a period of time, and you still from time to time, you see Sage 100 refer to Sage 100 as Sage 100 Cloud. It's sort of a marketing branding. And Sage has said that that pretty much is to reference that it's cloud connected. And what that typically means is that a lot of third-party tools, including REPAY, can connect to Sage 100 through the cloud. REPAY does it through a vault they use to securely store credit cards. Other third parties may use it just through connections to their backend, whether it's for sales tax or other things like that. So Sage 100 Cloud, on its surface, has been labeled that way to be deemed as cloud connected. But definitely the future of Sage 100, I think, is in the cloud, which makes it easier to do several different things. The main thing that I tell people it's much easier to do with Sage 100 in the cloud is things like upgrades, configuration, anything where typically before we might have had to go to everybody's desktop and go desktop to desktop to run a workstation update. We don't have to do that anymore in the cloud. A lot of people will also, Jeff, they ask the question, geez, well, I'm not really sure that I want to get involved with the cloud because of security. Well, typically people these days, they protect themselves a couple ways. First of all, they usually use a VPN, which will give them a virtual private network between wherever they are remotely and their central server, which keeps the data secure. The second thing that they would do, and I'm increasingly seeing more people, is they'll use what I never really knew what this meant until one of my customers explained the acronym, MFA, multi-factor authentication, right? So that's usually what happens is when you log in using a multi-factor authentication, the way you make it more secure is in this thing, you have two things that you need to log in. Something your password, and something you physically possess, which is your multi-factor. Typically, it's on your iPhone. Cloud can mean a bunch of different things. What I've told people on the very basic level is it could be something like a terminal server, right? It can just be a basic remote desktop that you set up on your own servers. I kind of count that as a cloud so that you can remotely have all of your users logging in from across the country into the servers that are on your premises. And you use that via a terminal server. There's also third parties that will do this all for you. So I have some customers that say, hey, we don't have an IT department and we don't want to set this up. And they use these third-party providers that know how to set this up for Sage and set up the servers and set up the access and can provide, in most cases, the multi-factor to make it even more secure. When you migrate to cloud-based products, no matter what the product is, it's going to be different than Sage 100, right? So they're going to use different data tables. There's going to be different third-party integrations. So you're going to have to make some type of a migration if you were to move from Sage 100 to a different cloud provider, whether it's Sage Intacct, whether it's NetSuite, or any competitor that's in the cloud, you're still going to have to make a migration. One of the things that you can do is you could take your Sage 100 that's sitting on your server, and you can put that in the cloud with very, very little effort. And what's interesting is that all of those third-party integrations, they'll also work in the cloud. I haven't run into any that don't work in the cloud. And almost all of the third parties are familiar with it. Most of the third parties really don't care where you're running it. Because to them, they're probably going to be remote anywhere, anyways. They don't know whether they're remoting into your office, to your on-prem server, or whether they're remoting to an Azure server or to, a cloud-based server. So pretty straightforward. Like on Sage 100, that's sort of a secret. It is actually pretty easy to migrate yourself to the cloud. It usually becomes a return on investment. People look at it and they say, okay, what is it going to cost me to get to the cloud? And what's going to be my return on investment? And in these days, everybody is very cognizant of work from home, right? So almost everybody is working from home. We all just went through this. It's not like it seems like it's going away anytime soon. And certainly being able to have Sage 100 in cloud significantly eases that option for people to log in remotely from home. To the extent that we can sandbox, and to the extent that the sandbox is available, and just, sandboxing just means, hey, with something like REPAY, where we want to send a test credit card transaction, I don't want to do that on my personal credit card or your card. So typically these third parties will have something they refer to as a sandbox, where you can do test transactions to make sure that it's connecting properly without having to send a live one out, right? If I'm doing shipping, for example, I don't want to have UPS come in and look for 15 boxes when I'm just testing out my system. So sandboxing is a great way, and a lot of third parties have that ability to sandbox so that you can do some testing. I tend to be a proponent of doing as quickly as we can, depending upon how complicated the migration is going to be. So we get 2 or 3 users that are involved with testing, and initially this can last, from a week. I've had it last 6 months. It really varies depending upon the customer and how much they want to test. I have a customer that has a completely sandboxed set of Sage 100 that runs full time, that they use to test everything until we go live with their live Sage 100. So it can vary from customer to customer. Like usually the ISVs like a REPAY or a Starship or a ScanForce, the common ones that integrate to Sage, they're going to work when we connect them, or they're going to be made to work pretty quickly. It's the little things that tend to be problematic. And that's another nice thing with the cloud, is I can set up all the workstations at once. If you're not on the cloud, or you're not somewhere where I can use like a terminal server to get it to every workstation, I have to remotely connect to every person. For the accounting systems that are on-prem, whether we're moving them into the cloud or not, is to stay current. We're seeing a lot of technology changes. Microsoft is coming out with a change to how they're going to allow you to authenticate your email. You need to have certain modern authentication to be able to get in there and now continue to use your Microsoft email box. We've also seen where transport layer security, or TLS, is now being updated. So you need to be on the latest versions of Sage to take advantage of that. The biggest thing I would say is we're starting to come to an era of where staying current is being so much more important, and having that one centralized place to upgrade Sage makes it a lot easier to do that. SchulzSays.com, Schulz without the T, SCHULZ, says.com.